Nora Speaks is a weekly podcast that tugs at the soul and consciousness of the Black community. With show topics such as youth empowerment, education, women's impact, and civic engagement, Nora Speaks challenges the listener to not only join the movement, but be the movement. On the show, you'll learn from insightful guests who have demonstrated capacity in these fields and more, and I'm your host, Nora Muhammad. Welcome to the show. Welcome to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast, and I am your host, Nora Muhammad. Well, thank you for joining me again for another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast, and if you have not already done so, I would encourage you to subscribe to Nora Speaks wherever podcasts are streamed. That's Anchor, that's Spotify, that's Amazon Podcasts, that's Pandora, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts. Please subscribe so that anytime a new episode is published, you will get a notification on your smartphone. And also, please follow Nora Speaks Podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and tell your friends to do the same. There's important conversations that are happening on the Nora Speaks Podcast, and it is important that we get information that can sustain us and that can improve our conditions and improve our outcomes. And we need content that does more than just entertain us. And that's what Nora Speaks does. We give information here on this show that is not just for entertainment purposes. We want to inspire, we want to enlighten, we want to edify the Black community. And we cannot always do that if we're laughing, if we're dancing, if we're singing. Sometimes we have to sit down and listen. Sometimes we have to be cerebral. Sometimes we have to be intellectual and think. And I'm glad that you have joined me for this episode of the podcast so that you can take time to think about what is being said in this episode. In this episode, I want to talk about something that I've been a part of for quite some time, and I've been fortunate to be a part of, and that is the juvenile justice system. And I'm grateful to be able to be a volunteer, to be a participant, to be a service provider to our young people who have been adjudicated, who have had some interactions with the criminal justice system, who are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated or in detention. You know, our children, our young people, they are the most vulnerable of our population. And if we are not careful in how we are governing society, how we are structuring our households, how we are structuring our communities, then we will always neglect those who are most vulnerable. We will always disadvantage and disenfranchise those who are most vulnerable, and they are our children. And so I came across an article recently, and it was talking about some new approaches with the juvenile justice system. And I have to say, I am grateful to be a participant and a service provider and a volunteer within the juvenile justice system. I cannot help but think about what we are missing. So many approaches deal with our children after they've had some delinquency, after they've had some interaction with the criminal justice system, with law enforcement, having sat and stood in front of a judge. And when that gate is open and that horse is out, it's so hard to corral, to bring back in. And so when I say something is missing, I believe it's the prevention piece. And I know that there are many approaches to prevention of violence amongst young people. I've been to conferences on violence prevention amongst teens. I've been a part of conversations and conferences and dealing with those who are in the juvenile justice system and how to help them get on the straight and narrow path. I've been a part of those conversations, and there's great conversations that are being held by some really wonderful and thoughtful people. And I have to say, I'm personally grateful for those people that I've been in conversations with who are in the juvenile justice system and in those services and trying to support our young people who are there But I must say, something is missing. And when I think about our young people and all of the trauma and all of the experiences that they have before they engage in delinquency, what is happening in our homes and in our communities? What are we not doing that creates the instability, that creates the fear, that creates the trauma, that creates the pain, where our children are running from our homes? So in thinking about that, I thought about the ACEs survey. And for those who may be unfamiliar with ACEs, ACE, that is the measurement that the Center for Disease Control conducts, or it's a survey. And ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences. And so the survey generally has 10 questions where you would answer yes or no to these questions. And one question involves physical abuse, another sexual abuse, another physical neglect, another emotional neglect. One asks if there's a family member who has been in prison. Another asks about domestic violence, having witnessed their mother being abused. And these experiences, if someone was to answer yes, that denotes some kind of adverse childhood experience, some kind of trauma that a child has experienced. And so in my research and what I've learned, and research that I can read from studies and from literature, and in my research and just speaking with young people who I've met in the corrections center, in the justice center, in the detention center, what I've learned is that most of the young people who are there have had some adverse childhood experience. They've had some significant adversity. And generally, it's not just one, it's multiple. And these children who are experiencing these unfortunate things in their life at such vulnerable times, how do we expect them to manage? How do we expect them to cope? Some homes have drug abuse there. Some homes have domestic violence there. Some homes there's food insecurity, or there's insecurity with housing. So our children are faced with so much. And so children can act out. Children can engage in delinquency for a number of reasons. They could be looking for family in the gang. They could be looking for something to eat and they're stealing. They could be looking to get away from an abusive household and they've ran away and now they are selling drugs to make money, or they are prostituting themselves to make money to survive. But what are we doing? What steps are we taking to impact the home life, to impact what's happening in the community, to impact the provision educationally for our children in the schools, so that our homes, our communities, and our schools can be safe places for our children? And, we are guilty. We are guilty for not promoting a culture of wholeness in the Black community. We are guilty of this. When we will listen to music and consume media that is destructive, that promotes dysfunctional and unstable home lives and communities, what do we expect as an outcome when we're consuming this kind of content? When we are, and I mean consuming it whole scale. There was a time when, underground rap, there were, really positive lyrics and real hip hop. I mean, real hip hop, right? Real lyricists. And they were underground. How is it that the most negative, the most debasing, the most degrading, the content that promotes drug abuse, sexual violence, how is that the mainstream and not the underground that, you have to go look for. We don't have to go look for content in our media that promotes a dysfunctional lifestyle. Not in Black music, not in Black culture, not for us. It is popular. It is on the radio. And so we are consuming it. And our children are consuming it. So they're seeing dysfunction in the home. They're listening to dysfunction in their music, and they're acting out with these dysfunctional behaviors. And then we find them involved in the criminal justice system. We find them in juvenile detention centers, and parents and aunts and teachers, where everybody's now looking to figure out, how do we fix this child? How can we get this child just to act right? And see, here we are trying to repair damage that has been done when we can focus our energy and our attention in preventing the damage. But we do not focus our attention or our resources on preventing damage. And I say we are working backwards. It is so hard to put that problem under control. It is so hard to kind of put that genie back in the box once it's out. I've listened to young women, girls, talk about being addicted to methamphetamines, being addicted to hard street drugs at very, very young ages. Now, we have a 12, a 13-year-old, a 15-year-old, and now this young person has to live an entire lifetime of fighting the demon of drug addiction, right? How can we get ahead of that so that that is not something that we have to be combating in helping this child get sober, understand sobriety, understand addiction, and to stay sober, right? Our young people who are being sexually abused in their homes, who are witnessing domestic violence in their homes. And then they come out into the community and they're violent and they're impulsive and they're out of control and their emotions are high and they don't know how to control their emotions. And then they act out based on their experiences, and we want to incarcerate these children. We do incarcerate them, or we put them in programs. But now we're on the back end trying to repair what could have been prevented on the front end. And our children, they're hurting. And many of us are living our lives and doing what we want to do and having a good old time. And we're not cognizant of the impact of our own lifestyles, our own choices on children. For a child to have a parent in jail, that is an adversity. For a child to have a parent that uses drugs at home, that is an adversity. For a child to have insecurity because they're living in a shelter, or they're living in a car, or they're living, sleeping on someone's couch, or they themselves have a eviction notice on their door, that is an adversity. A child who is being physically, sexually abused or neglected, that is an adversity. But do we confront our young people and our young parents on how they are raising their children? Or do we just mind our business? It's not my business. I'm not going to say anything. And we're watching the neglect and the abuse and the trauma happen to these little girls and these little boys. And we turn the other way because it is not our business. But it is our business. And we may not go to someone personally and say, you shouldn't talk to your child like that, or, you shouldn't engage in this kind of behavior in front of your child. Maybe you don't want to do that. But collectively, we can promote a healthy lifestyle. We can promote healthy content. We can promote healthy eating. We can promote physical activity. We can promote good living, but we don't, because it's not our business and we stay out of it. And then we want the social workers and the clinicians and the substance abuse counselors and the juvenile justice staff to fix the problem that we created In our neglect, in us just living our own lives, we want them to fix the problem. And I'm telling you what I have experienced firsthand. I was fortunate to be part of a program wherein I was the one who would do the intake for young people who were coming into a program, and most of the young people had been adjudicated having engaged in some kind of delinquent behavior. And they were referred to a program that I was a part of. And during the intake, I got to learn so much. So I know what I'm talking about. Most of the mothers were very young. The children who came, most of them were boys in this program. And they were 15, 14, 16, 18, 13, 11. Most of them did not have a father in their life. Most of them didn't know who their fathers were. The ones who knew who their fathers were, the father was in jail. And this is just one adversity that this child had to deal with in his lifetime. On top of that, poverty was a factor in the home and for the family. And on top of that, physical and emotional abuse from sometimes the very parent, mother or grandmother who I was doing the intake with. And so I'm listening to the mothers explain, the grandmothers explain what's going on with their grandsons, their daughters, their sons. And as I'm listening to this, and I'm listening to this guardian represent what's happening with the child, and I'm paying attention to the guardian, and I can see why the child is struggling the way he or she is struggling, because it started with the parent. Now, I'm not saying I'm blaming the parent, but certainly the parent can't give the child that which the parent neglects, or that which the parent doesn't have herself. If the mother does not know how to create a stable life, how can this child be stable, right? And so the fathers are nowhere, not around, and to not know who your father is, to not have the support of father is traumatic. And for the life of me, I cannot understand why in the Black community we do not promote families. We're watching the prison houses be filled with our men. We're watching this happen. And most of the time, these men who are going to the prisons had some issue with their father. It could have been absenteeism. It could have been abandonment. It could have been the father was killed in the street, had an accident and was killed, or the father was himself imprisoned. And so if we can put together the figures and understand the mathematics, that most of the men, our young men, who are finding themselves involved in the criminal justice system as boys, graduating to the adult justice system or criminal justice system, and we see the trend of lack of father, lack of positive male figure. Why do we not promote families? Why do we not promote marriage? And our women are trying to keep a handle on these boys, and the boys can only be controlled so much and so well up until they get to be a certain age. And we are fortunate if we are able to. And so that brings me to another point. The ability for us as a community to stand in the gap for children in need. Because maybe a young man's father or a little girl's father was killed, had an accident, was imprisoned. Shouldn't the community stand in and fill in, not take the place of, but fill in that absence that occurs because of the father not being there? There is a gap there, and the community should stand up and fill in and support the family in some way. But every man is to himself in our society. Every man is for himself in our society. But we want the community, or we should want the community to support families, and we want the families to support community, because every situation isn't ideal. Marriages break up. Things can fall apart. It can happen. A family can fall on hard times, and, money can become an issue. Poverty could become an issue. Sure, these things happen. But how fortunate is it when we have a community that we can fall back on and rely on and stabilize us so that we don't fall off the edge of the cliff like so often happens. I see our young women in the juvenile justice system. A common theme is sexual abuse. A common theme, domestic violence. A common theme is watching and being a witness to sexual violence and molestation. We are not protecting our most vulnerable, and that is our children. And then we have a whole industry called the juvenile justice system, where we have the task of helping to repair, helping to rehabilitate damage that was done that could be prevented. We should have an expectation. The injustice, I will say, the injustice of this society, in our culture, Black culture in America, is that we do not demand stability in the community, in our homes, in our schools, for our most vulnerable. The expectations in Black culture does not compel stability. How often, and I've said this before on the podcast, how often do we hear of a teenage girl getting pregnant and nobody demanding that young man and that young woman create a family for this new life that is coming into the world? Now look, the new life coming into the world, that child does not care about whether he is ready or she is ready for marriage. That child is ready for stability. And we have to put the needs of our children on the front burner, and our own desire for fun and excitement, we got to put that on the back burner. We should be excited about raising whole, healthy children, but our society doesn't promote that. Our society promotes partying. Our society promotes shopping. Our society promotes dripping and blinging and all of that. Our society does not promote raising whole, healthy, well-rounded children. We are failing our children. There is only so much that the juvenile justice system can do. And boy, are we fortunate to have some really great people who are trying some really great innovations in helping to support our young people that we have neglected and that find themselves in the system. But there's something that we can do, and it starts at home, and it starts with family. We should have an expectation on our sons that if you want to have fun with a girl and oops, you get pregnant, well, guess what? You're not out of the picture. You have a responsibility, and you have a responsibility for 18 years. The same thing with our young women. We cannot let our girls be free and be casual with their bodies. I know that the music promotes it. I know that social media promotes it. But when that life is conceived and is coming into the world, that life does not care about what's on Facebook and Instagram and what Cardi B or Megan Thee Stallion or Drake or anybody, our children don't care about all of that. What our children care about are having their needs met. And we are doing a poor job meeting the needs of our children when we have so many of them in the juvenile justice system. We have to do better. Our children need us to do better. Our culture should demand that we do better. But in the absence of that, Sister Noor Muhammad, I'm asking for us to do better. Most of the things that are impacting our young people, the young people who find themselves in the criminal justice system, in the juvenile justice system, they're preventable. They are preventable. And we have to give our attention to the needs of our children. We have to be vigilant in raising them. We have to be vigilant in protecting them so that we don't have to work so hard on the back end in trying to repair the damage that was done by our neglect and our inattention. I want you to think about this. I want you to share this conversation with a friend, with a cousin. Think about what we can do to help our children come into the world and be prepared to be successful. Come into this world and prepared to be successful. So we have to change the nature of our mindset. We have to change our attitudes. We have to change what we have allowed to become common in our communities. And we have to promote family. We have to promote community. Without this oneness, then what we are seeing now is only going to get worse. I want to thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. And to those who are doing the good work in the juvenile justice system, I thank you. I'm grateful to be working with you, to be a part of great teams who are doing great work, and keep up the great work. But as the community, we have to do better. Thank you so much. And until next time, stay in peace. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. Be on the lookout for a new episode coming at you fresh next week. And as always, if you want to learn more about me and the work that I do, visit my website, norahmuhammad.com. Or if you have a listener question, email me at info@norahspeaks.com. You can also follow the Nora Speaks podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Nora Speaks Podcast. I'll be sure to include links in the show notes. If this show has value to you, please subscribe, rate, and review, and share it with family and friends. And be sure to check out previous episodes. And remember, don't just join the movement, be the movement. Stay in peace.